Hi guys, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today's video is going to be my favourite horrors of all time. I did a video similar to this about a year and a half ago where I was talking about my favourite thrillers of all time, and I was going to do an updated version of that, but I was looking at all the books that I've read since that video and there weren't many that stood out as new favourites, so I might do a video like that soon, whether it's just with a fewer amount of books or I might just wait until they stack up a little bit more. But I've never actually done a video sat down talking about my favourite horrors, so altogether on this list I've got 13 books and then one honorary mention but I've only actually got 4 of them in physical form. So the first books that I'm going to recommend are the horror novellas that I've read. The only one that I actually have physically here is Crossroads by Laurel Hightower. This is a super teeny tiny little book. It's only 110 pages, so you could literally get through this in a couple of hours. In this book we're following this woman who is called Chris, and her son has been killed in a car accident and she's really struggling to move on from this and to deal with her grief. She often visits the crash site to go and mourn him, and one day she accidentally drops a little bit of blood from a cut on this site, and then later that night she thinks that she can see her son outside the window. And this book deals with the lengths that a parent will go to in order to see their child again, and the struggles of losing a child, moving on, dealing with grief and depression and all that sort of thing. I think I gave it 4.5 stars out of 5, but I think I then bumped it up to 5 afterwards because I couldn't stop thinking about it. To say that this book is 110 pages, it's so good at developing the characters really quickly. Obviously you've got this real life horror of losing a child, but then you've also got this blood sacrifice and this maybe paranormal thing happening. It was super emotional. It was actually quite scary. I think I gave this 4.5 initially because I didn't find it super terrifying, but I think it kind of did the job without it being really scary for me. Because it's so short, it's really fast paced, but it still manages to pack that emotional punch, and I would highly recommend this book, especially if you're perhaps newer to horror, because it is on the tamer side, but there are some quite graphic descriptions of blood and some body horror and things. But this one definitely stuck with me and I think I will remember this for a long time, and I definitely need to check out what else she's written because yeah, I just love the writing in this and I think you should all read it. The next short story that I want to talk about is 1922 by Stephen King, and also honorary mention to Night Shift by Stephen King, which is a collection of short stories. There's a lot in that collection that I gave 5 stars, so I would recommend that if you want a collection. So in 1922 we're following this guy called Wilf who's basically writing a confession letter saying that he's killed his wife, and then he basically goes on to tell the story of how he did it and why he did it, and then the consequences of what he's done. I've noticed that rats feature quite heavily in Stephen King books, or at least the ones that I've read, so I'm wondering if he's really scared of rats, I don't know. But yeah, rats are a massive theme in this book. There's a lot of gross body horror. I thought it was very atmospheric, it was tense. This book is only 132 pages, and again I was very invested in the characters. I was really nervous to see what was going to happen to them, especially Wilf's son. I really liked his story arc and where that went, and it also had a really good ending. I thought it was a really satisfying end. This is probably my favourite thing I've read by Stephen King, aside from Night Shift. I'm tied between the two. As a whole, Night Shift I enjoyed, but there were definitely some stories that I didn't like as much as others, but I think I gave 1922 4.5 out of 5. I find that I like Stephen King's short stories much more than I like his novels because I think he rambles on quite a lot. So if you want to start reading Stephen King but you don't really know where to begin, I would recommend his short horror stories. And then the last short story that I want to recommend is one that you've probably heard me talk about before, and it is We Need to Do Something by Max Booth III. I feel like I've talked about this loads but this is probably my favourite horror story of all time. Something about this book just really resonated with me. We're basically following this family who hear a hurricane warning or a tornado warning, and they all take refuge in their bathroom, and as a result of the weather this tree basically falls onto the house and traps them all in the bathroom so they can't get out. And it's about how this family try and deal with this situation of being trapped. I think I read it all in one go. I just loved it so much. The horror in this book is very specific to what scares me. So I'm terrified of natural disasters. I used to have nightmares about tornadoes when I was a kid, and then I'm so interested in domestic family situations. So having them all trapped in one place where the dad is quite an angry person and the rest of the family have to walk on eggshells around him, I thought that was such an interesting setup for a horror story. There were some really gory bits, some bits that were so terrifying. I read them and I got jump scared and I loved the ending as well. The ending was just everything I wanted it to be. That is my top horror short story ever. I just can't praise this book enough, and I think about it all the time. So yeah, if you're going to take one recommendation from this video, take that one. The next book I do have physically, but I think my sister's borrowing it at the minute, and that is The Last House on Needless Street by Catriona Ward. I'm just having to look at Goodreads to actually remember how to describe this book, because the main thing I remember about this book is the spoiler. And I can't remember like how it sets up. So this is the story of a serial killer, a stolen child, revenge, death, and an ordinary house at the end of an ordinary street. All these things are true, and yet they are all lies. You think you know what's inside The Last House on Needless Street, you think you've read this story before, that's where you're wrong. So it's definitely very mysterious, and you kind of go into it not knowing what's happening for most of it. You've just got to trust the process, and then when you finally understand and when the penny drops, this book was so good. I love the explanation as to what's happening in this book. It was definitely very surprising. I didn't see it coming. If you've ever read Piranesi by Susanna Clarke, this kind of felt a bit like that, where you're just thrown into this very bizarre situation and it doesn't make sense until it does. And when it does, it's really, really amazing. It felt very clever, and although this is kind of horror, it's also more of a mystery, so it's not like full-on horror. So if you're someone who doesn't like gross stuff, a lot of nasty descriptions and things, then this one might be a good pick. And it felt like being in a dream until it all clicked. So I would recommend that one if you quite enjoy being like dropped into a unknown world and then everything slowly coming together like a bit of a jigsaw. Oh, and also one of the point of views is from the perspective of a cat, so obviously I love that, so that's another positive as well. The next book that I want to recommend is more of a thriller, I think, but it's definitely mixed with a horror as well, and that is No Exit by Taylor Adams. This was another 5-star read. This is possibly the fastest paced book that I've ever read. We're following this girl called Darby, I think, and she's travelling in a snowstorm to go and visit her mum. The snowstorm gets so bad that she ends up stopping at this rest stop, and there's loads of people that are trapped there because they just can't drive any further. So where all these cars are parked, Darby sees a young child in a cage in the back of somebody's van, and then straight away we are in high stakes, very action-packed, fast-paced thriller, and this was such an exciting book. I got through it so quickly. I felt literally exhausted after finishing this book because you're just so invested, and every time you thought it was kind of getting resolved, something else bad would happen, and it just kept going and going and going. And there is some violence and stuff in there that I feel is quite like horrifying, so it is a little bit of a mix between mystery, thriller and horror. So if you want to read something that's a little bit horrifying but also will just suck you in from the moment you start, then this one is the one for you. You will not want to put this book down, and it has such a good like snowy atmosphere as well, so it's just an all-round winner. The next one that I have here I do kind of own. I borrowed this from my sister and my cat spilled chocolate milkshake all over it, so it's a little bit grim. So I really need to buy my sister a new copy of this book. But it's Come Closer by Sarah Gran. I read this all in one day. This is about a woman who convinces herself that she's been possessed by a demon. She starts hearing weird noises in her flat. She starts getting these weird impulsive thoughts that she just wouldn't normally have. So yeah, she ends up convincing herself that she's probably possessed. And this is a short book. I think it's only 165 pages. So I suppose you could kind of class this as a novella. I don't know what a novella actually is defined as. Is it like 150 pages or something? So this could kind of go in that category as well. But I just loved everything about this book. I found it really hard to put it down. I really liked this character. I love following a female character who's just going through some stuff. And this woman definitely is. It gets slowly more unhinged throughout. She starts behaving more and more erratically. And there's this debate as to whether she is possessed. Is it mental health? There were definitely some scary scenes in this book, but I think the real horror was just the thought that this could kind of happen to anyone. It felt very realistic, and I love that kind of horror where it feels very familiar but there's just something not quite right about it. If you're into like unhinged, morally grey female characters but you also want some horror in there, then this is a really good one, and I really liked how it ended as well. So yeah, this one was a 5-star because I just couldn't put it down and I couldn't fault it, so I would definitely recommend this one. I also want to read her newest book. Is it The Book of the Most Precious Substances? So I'm going to give that one a go. I don't actually know if that one's a horror or not, but yeah, hopefully that one will be just as good. The next book that I want to talk about is The Ruins by Scott Smith. This book is about a group of friends who go on holiday in Mexico, and they end up looking for one of their missing friends in the jungle. They end up coming across this tribe who they can't communicate with. The tribe basically surround them and won't let them leave this hill. They can't figure out why, and things get more horrifying from there. This is like a pure classic horror. The characters were kind of archetypes, I think. So they all felt interesting, but also you're not totally invested in them, which I kind of liked. The thing I liked the most about this book was the group dynamics, and I think I really like that kind of horror where people are forced into a very confined situation and how they all sort of react to that. There's a lot of body horror in this book. It was very like overly descriptive, but in a way that I liked. Some of the scenes were dragged out in like excruciating detail, but it kind of made me feel like I was there with them, and that even though some of it was a little bit slower paced, it kind of matched the situation where they are literally just sat there waiting, where they can't leave, they're waiting for someone to come and rescue them, and they just feel a bit helpless. And I feel like the overly descriptive, like on and on writing kind of matched that. So I really love this book. I gave it 4.5 stars and then I bumped it up to 5. I don't know why I do that. I think it's because I like to see how much I think about a book afterwards, and this one is one that I still think about a lot. I also really love the ending of this book. It's not the most satisfying ending, but I really loved it. The next book that I want to recommend is actually a graphic novel, and that is Uzumaki by Junji Ito. I borrowed this one from my library and I think I read it in a day, even though it's like over 600-700 pages. But because it's a graphic novel, well, it's actually a manga. Or is it manga? Like, I feel like I've heard other people say manga, but I feel like my voice just wants to say manga. Either way, it is one of those. So this book is the story of a town that has kind of been taken over by spirals, and you wouldn't think that spirals could be scary, but if you read this book, they are scary. I'm not going to put any pictures in this video, but if you're interested, look at some of the illustrations in this book because they are minging. They are so disgusting. I was literally getting jump scared in this book so much because his drawings are just incredible, so disgusting and terrifying, but I just couldn't stop reading it because it was just so interesting. I don't know if I want to read another one of his books because they are that like nasty, they stay in your brain for a long time, but I just loved being in this kind of world. My only issue with this book was I feel like it wrapped up in a way that I didn't really want it to, and it was kind of long, but that might have just been because I read it all in one go. And I felt like towards the end, the initial like novelty of it was starting to wear off just a little bit, but I still really enjoyed it as a whole. I was looking at some of his other graphic novels or manga in Waterstones, and he's got so many, but I'm not sure which one to read next because I think this one is a really popular one, and yeah, I'm not really sure where to go from here. So if you've read any of his other books before, let me know. It's just such a quick reading experience, so I would highly recommend it if you want to see a lot of your horror as well as read it. The next book that I want to talk about is The Devil All the Time by Donald Ray Pollock. This is more of a literary horror kind of book. We're basically following a cast of characters over a number of years who are all a little bit nasty and gross. One of the characters has just come back from the war and he's pretty traumatized by what he's seen. I think the wife gets ill and then he starts having like a mental breakdown. We're also following a serial killer couple and they save all their money so they can go on a road trip and kill people every year. There's a priest who has some very unconventional methods of preaching. So they're all very bizarre people. They're all very not okay morally. There's not much of a plot that like overarches everything, but they do kind of link up towards the end, if that makes sense. We get lots of short little snippets of characters and it's just interesting. Like, I just loved reading about these very bizarre people and all the grim things that they were doing. It's very atmospheric. I just liked the vibes of this book. I don't know how I liked it because it was just a bit nasty, but I just enjoyed being in this world and I feel like it could have gone on and on and on and I would have still enjoyed it. And yeah, by the end of this book it got very like fast paced and I was so invested in what was going to happen with our characters, and I gave it 5 stars. So yeah, I'm gonna read his other book which is called Knock 'em Stiff, which I think is more of a short story collection. Also, there's some proper gross horror in this book. There's one bit which I can't even discuss because it makes me feel so sick, and as I was reading it I was like skipping through it because no, like that is too far for me. Like I like gross body horror because it makes me feel like disgusted, and that's the point of the book, but sometimes it can just go a bit too far, and I just like had a bit of a gag reflex there just thinking about it, so let's move on. And the last one in this straight up horror category is Tender is the Flesh by Augustina Bazterrica. This is about a society in the not so distant future where animal meat has become contaminated and humans can no longer eat it, or like any form of animal products. People decide to eat other people. There's lots of descriptions about how humans are being specifically bred to raise them for slaughter. The main character in this book works for this plant where they do this to humans and they process them for food products. Also, they don't refer to them as humans, I don't think. Can't remember what they call them. Might be products. But yeah, they just completely dehumanize these people, and someone gifts him a human as like a gift, as in like, oh, she's gonna taste delicious. And our main character is just a bit like, what am I meant to do with this? Like, I don't really want to kill her and eat her, but I don't want to show that I don't want to do that. Yeah, I loved this book so much. It made me feel a lot of things. It had some really shocking twists in there which I really did not expect at all. I loved the ending. I think about this book constantly because this book really stands out to me as something that could possibly happen in the future, and that is probably the scariest thing about it, because is this an option that humans actually would consider if that was to happen, where animals couldn't be used anymore? I honestly think that this could be like a classic dystopian book. I definitely need to buy this book and read it again because I feel like it could be an all-time favourite, so I need to reread it just to solidify that in my brain. And then I wanted to shove my honorary mention here because it would fit into this category if I was going to include it, but unfortunately I'm not, just because I gave it a 3-star when I finished it, and that one is Stolen Tongs by Felix Blackwell. The reason why I want to mention it as an honorary mention is because the first like third of this book is the scariest thing that I've ever read. I was literally scared to go to the toilet, and I've never had that before with a horror book. It was truly terrifying, and I thought this was going to be a 5-star, but unfortunately, because this book is like a full-length novel, it's like 320 pages, I feel like it just went on a bit too long, and I didn't really like the direction that it went in or the ending. But I think a lot of people rate this quite highly. If you want something that's truly terrifying and will keep you up at night, give this one a go. This is about a couple and they go on this cabin retreat holiday, and then he notices that his girlfriend is asleep, but she's like sleep talking, and she's actually having a conversation with this like figure outside. And if that's not terrifying, I don't know what is. I just wish this story was a novella, and I wish it went in a slightly different direction, because this one had a lot of potential for me. It was so scary, and then yeah, it just kind of went a bit off the rails. So I'm giving it an honorary mention because it's not one of my all-time favourites, but I do remember it quite fondly because of just how terrified I was. So I thought it was worth a mention in case anyone wants something that is like keep you up at night scary. And then my last 2 books are in the category of horror slash possibly something else, but I found them scary. So the first one I have here is Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer. Again, I think I gave this one a 4-star or a 4.5-star, but I've remembered this is a 5-star book, so again I'm going to change that. Or actually no, I'm going to reread it because this is a trilogy and I do have the other 2 on my shelf here. The second one I read and I gave like a 2-star I think, and I've not read the third one. So I'm going to reread all these books and just adjust my expectations, because the first book and the second book are very different in tone. So this book is about Area X, which is an area that has been cordoned off from the rest of civilization because there's some sort of environmental disaster going on there, but it's been a mystery for about 30 years where nobody can explain what happened there or why it exists. There's this secret government agency who have sent 11 expeditions to the area. One of them ended in mass suicide, another one in a hail of gunfire, and the 11th in a fatal cancer epidemic. So now they're about to send the 4th expedition, which is a group of 4 women, into this area to try and figure out what the hell is going on there. This book is slightly slower paced, I think. It's also quite short actually. It is 195 pages. Something really just like got under my skin with this. It's just creepy and eerie, and there's a lot of questions. It's very like fear of the unknown. Something about it just scared me so bad. Like there's this bit where they're like going through this tower, and they're just like going round and round in this tower, and I remember being so scared of what was going to happen. There's just something about this book that I don't know, left like a lasting mark. Just a feeling of being lost in this terrifying place and you don't know what's happening. But then the second book is told from the perspective of somebody who works for this government agency, and it was very like bureaucratic. There wasn't as much tension and excitement in that book, so yeah, I didn't really like it, but I think I'm going to give it another go. I also watched the film version of this book and it was pretty good, but I still prefer the book a lot. It's just haunting, it's strange. The reason why I say this isn't full horror is because it's probably more sci-fi. I don't even know if it would be described as horror. It's very like literary sci-fi, but for some reason I was just terrified by it, so I'm including it in this book video. And then the last one that I have here is Leave the World Behind by Rumen Alam. I think I talk about this book all the time, like I'm always referencing it in like why I liked a book, because it gave me the feeling that this one did, because this one left such an impression on me. In this book we're following a family who are on a holiday in this Airbnb. It's just outside of like New York where I think they live, and then the owners of the B&B come to the house and they say, can we please come in, there's something going on in New York City, all the power's out, and you know we do own this property, so we're really sorry to barge in on your holiday, but can we just stay here because we don't know what's going on. And this is kind of a fiction story mainly, but it really scared me because again it's that feeling of the unknown. You don't really know what's going on in the outside world. They don't even know if this couple who apparently own the Airbnb are genuine. But the thing that scared me about this book is this eerie, creepy feeling where something's going on in the outside world and you don't know what it is, and it's terrifying. And that is such a thing that I love in books. I need more books like that because I feel like this has it, also We Need to Do Something has it, where it feels like there's a large scale disaster coming, which is one of my biggest fears. Things like this just freak me out so bad, where there's just so many questions and they can't really figure out what's happening, and in a way they kind of pretend like nothing is happening and they kind of carry on with their holiday. I remember there's this bit where they're describing a sound, like they hear something, and it was the scariest description I've ever read. Just of this sound, which obviously I can't hear. It is quite an unsatisfying book, and I think that's why I rated it lower, but I think that's probably what's kept me so interested in it. And I'm always seeking out books that have this sort of vibe. There's something in it which is just very eerie, creepy. There's an underlying tension, but it's not like in your face horror action. And sometimes I really love that and sometimes I don't, but in this one I really loved it. So that is all the books I want to talk to you about today. I'm still very like new to horror. I only really started reading it in like 2021, I think. There's nothing like massively groundbreaking here, but hopefully you've got to know a little bit more about my taste. Let me know what books you think I would enjoy based on all of those, or if you now want to read any of them, because yeah, most of the books in this video are 5 stars for me. Let me know if you enjoyed this video, give it a like if you liked it, and subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll hopefully see you in my next video. Bye!